The question that I get asked the most is Last Epoch actually worth buying? And while this is obviously a very subjective thing, I will do my best to kind of present the game to you so you can then make your own decision. First up, Last Epoch is an up-and-coming RPG developed by 11th Hour Gaming. It will be released on the 21st of February, and it will have ongoing support. So that basically means sort of like the Path of Exile model, where it will have leaks called cycles. As of this recording, the game costs $35 with no extra fees attached in terms of stash tabs or anything like that, or quality of life. Most of the in-game shop will revolve around cosmetics. However, while the Last Epoch hype right now is riding high, especially after the disappointing release of Diablo 4, I will say that there are still a lot of things to pick from that this game does not do very well. So in order to explore this game, I will give you all the things I like about the game and then all the things I dislike, do a conclusion, and then you can kind of pick and choose from there and subjectively say whether it's the game for you. Before I do that though, just for context, I will give you a very quick rundown about the classes and the skill system. We have 5 different classes to choose from. Each of these have 3 masteries that you can specialize in. You cannot change these later. If we go from left to right, we have our sort of paladin class, which is called the Sentinel. It can be sword and board. It can be a little bit more of a mage, but in general, it has 3 subclasses, which are called masteries: the Void Knight, the Forge Guard, and the Paladin. The Void Knight is sort of your corrupted holy paladin. It can be a mage, it can be melee. Forge Guard revolves around summoning weapons and armors that fight for you, and the Paladin is your typical paladin. Second, we have the Rogue, which has 3 subclasses right here. It's sort of your assassin-y type of character. First, we have the Blade Dancer, which is very agile and mobile. It dances around the battlefield. With the Marksman, which is your typical ranger style character. And coming in the new update is the Falconer, which is sort of your minion hybrid class, where you have this Falconer always by your side that basically fights for you. We then have the Mage with its 3 subclasses. First is the Sorcerer, which is your typical caster class, mostly around elemental magic. We have the Spellblade, which is your typical battle mage, your kind of melee, kind of ranged. And the Rune Master down here, which is a little bit more complicated, but you can basically conjure your own spells with different runes. We have the Primalist, which has 3 subclasses here. First up, the Beastmaster, which mostly revolves around having companions and making them stronger or them defending you. You have the Shaman, which is your typical elemental caster, mostly cold and lightning, but it's also used as sort of a melee style where you attack and you proc certain effects. It also revolves around totems that deal damage for you. And then at the end, we have the Druid, which is sort of your more burly type. You can kind of transform into a werebear, all of that good stuff, and it's also a very tanky class. And last but not least, we have the Acolyte, and there's 3 masteries right here. First up, the Necromancer, your typical minion class. I want to point out that there's a lot of minion classes in this game. It's not just Necromancer, so you're not completely locked into that, but it is the most straightforward one. We have the Lich, which is all about poison and getting into this Lich form that is extremely fast, extremely deadly, but also not the tankiest ever. And then we have Warlock, which is another caster class, although it mostly has to do with damage over time and more of like this chaos magic. You customize your character with the usual items. There's also idle slots, which are basically just items that you can further specialize into certain themes in your build. Then you have the main passive trees, which there's basically a passive tree for each of your mastery that you picked, and there is a main passive tree. And all you do here is allocate points, and you get passive bonuses for your character. The mastery that you chose, in this case for me, for example, Shaman, you can spec until all the way and take all the points that you want. And for all the other classes that you didn't take, you can still spec, but only until the halfway point. After that, you can also specialize 5 skills of your choice. What that means is each one of these skills that you use has a specific passive tree on its own. If you play Path of Exile, this is sort of like your support gems that kind of change the way your build plays. There's some that are more extreme than others. Some just give bonuses, and others completely revamp how your skill works. And at the end, you also have blessings that you can even further specialize your build into. These are being farmed from endgame regions to make your character even stronger. Now, that was obviously a very condensed version of what the game is about, especially how to customize your character, but I will be putting out a full beginner guide out. It might already be out whenever you're watching this. But now let's talk about things that I like in Last Epoch. The first thing is crafting and itemization. In my opinion, most important thing in any RPG. If this is not right, your game is not viable in this environment. And while I will be saying some bad things about Last Epoch at the end, I want you to understand when we start out here that this is 60 to 70% of what I love about Last Epoch, and it is what I care about the most, and it is great. And to fully explain why it is so well crafted, craft it. We have to first talk about the crafting system, which is at the very bottom of why it works so well. The crafting system is extremely basic, but it is not simple. The way it works is, I will, for example, take this staff right here. You have 4 mods on every item, and you can modify them. It goes from tier 1 up to tier 5. It can go higher on certain items, more on that in a second. But while crafting, you only have to concern yourself with tier 1 to tier 5. This is how I dropped this staff and picked it up. I can now look at this. I can say tier 2 critical strike chance. I would like to improve that to tier 3. So I will do that. Now, what just happened? I just upgraded it with a shard. These shards you can either find in the world, or you can break down item for parts. And if it had critical strike chance on it, chances are you will get shards for it. However, you cannot just do this for an unlimited amount of time. Down here, you see that it costs me forging potential to upgrade these stats. And it says exactly how much forging potential it has on the item up here. Once the forging potential is used up, I cannot further use it. Now, all you need to know here, there's not going to be a full crafting guide. All you need to know here is that you can influence the outcomes with certain glyphs, and you can also influence it with runes. And while at first it might seem very bare bones, there's actually a lot more to it. Now, the reason why this crafting system works, though, is because this game is very purposeful with how it uses its magic, rare, and exalted items. Let's start at magic items. It is actually viable to pick them up, because if I, for example, look at this item right here, this item, which I'm very nicely covering with my cam, has percentage health, a very sought-after stat. Now, what can I do with this? Well, you're not going to use it. Magic items have almost no crafting potential. They're very low level. But what you can still do is you can break them down, as I already said. So I can shatter them with a rune of shattering, and then I will get health shards. And for example, there was also poison res here, so poison res shards. And I can now take those health shards and put them on another item. I type in health. It says here, percentage health, add affix. There it is. First, this gives magic items an actual purpose, which is already bigger than most RPGs can actually say of themselves. Rare items, same thing. You can either take them apart or they're going to be your endgame. However, in very endgame, you are going to be looking at these exalted items. All they are is basically rare items with one stat being a little bit higher than you can usually craft. So for example, here the vitality is plus 12, and it is tier 6, and that means it's drop only. What that means is, in order to get your best items, you will not just have to craft, you also have to actually play the game. You have to pick up items, you have to look at them. Now at this point you might think, well, I played Diablo, I did not have a lot of fun sifting through a whole inventory of rare items, and I understand that, but Last Epoch thought about this, and the way they combat this is with an in-game loot filter that is highly customizable. You don't need to identify items. They already drop identified, and you can even search for exactly the mods that you want, which will mean that you can, for example, search for this vitality right here, and if it doesn't have the vitality, it gets hidden. So now you have the best of both worlds. You have rare items, magic items, exalted items that actually matter. You don't just want to craft from scratch like basically every item in Path of Exile, or you have to sift through hundreds of items like in D4. You just have the best of both worlds. Then let's talk about uniques, also a cornerstone of most RPGs. The way Last Epoch handles these is quite interesting. They don't just drop shitty uniques that are maybe good early, and then at a certain point they're not really usable. What they did is they added legendary potential. If you, for example, look at this weapon right here, it has a weird pink outline, and that is because this is not a unique anymore, it is a legendary. And the difference is I combined a exalted item, the upgraded rare item we talked about earlier, with a unique to make this. And the way you do that is with legendary potential. This item used to have 2 legendary potential, now it has 2 mods from a exalted item that I put on. You can see up here, legendary potential 1. What that might look like then later is, for example, this has legendary potential 2, and I got 2 extra mods on it. In order to do that, you need to kill a very hard boss, yada yada yada. What I want you to understand here is that this makes uniques very flexible, especially early game ones, because different items have different chances of getting legendary potential. So for example, if you have a leveling item that is very weak, it will have more chance of getting, for example, 3 or even 4 legendary potential, therefore making up for its weaknesses in end game, whereas some of the already strong uniques might be way harder to even get 1 legendary potential on. And the reason this is so genius is because very often these are build defining, right? Certain items you need for these builds, and if you don't have them, you can't play that build. So what they do is they will give you the item. Some are obviously still extremely rare, but most items are target farmable. But if you want the upgraded ones with legendary potential, now you have to farm. It is sort of another take, like Diablo 4, for example, does it with the Codex. And this makes end game grinding just so much more crazy, because you can theoretically get some of these end game items with 3 or 4 potential. Will it ever happen? Probably not, but there is potential. Whereas in PoE, nowadays with Miras, you can theoretically get perfect items on your character. Number 2 on this list is the character customization. Probably the next most important thing in an ARPG. You kind of want to have that class fantasy. If I want to cyclone around and I want to have echoes that stay within, I want that to be customizable to the point where I can have exactly what I want. Now, while this game doesn't have a big passive tree like Path of Exile, it does a lot of other things that are not really that complex, but it is quite deep. So first up, the passive tree, which is a lot more simplistic. However, you have this point where you can actually spec into other classes. For example, here I'm a Void Knight. I can still spec into Forge Guard in the first half. I can spec into Paladin, take a thing here or two. You start out with very basic stats like health, resistances, and end up at actually build-defining stuff. Like, for example, on this Void Knight, the chance to echo again with my Cyclone. So for example, you can see here, I leave behind echoes of myself that stay there and deal damage for a while. And once again, the skill system with each skill having its own passive tree really gives you a lot of wiggle room in customizing your character. So for example, my main skill right here is going to be Warpath, which is kind of like the Cyclone or Whirlwind of this game. And what I pathed here is the melee void damage route. There's a route up here where you basically apply this time rot to enemies, and the more they rot, the more damage they deal. So a little bit slower in terms of damage application, but has huge single target potential. Then I spec'd a little bit into movement speed because I was like, why not? I also spec'd a little bit into minus channeling cost because I didn't want to ever stop spinning. However, I could have also not done that and put more points into AoE or damage. Or I could have completely made this into a summoner by summoning forged weapons every so often while I'm cycloning, and it's kind of just a support skill. I can change its bleed capacity into Ignite. Basically, the world is your oyster with these skills, and it is quite admirable of them that they think they can actually balance all of these. It is a ton of work, but also so much fun. This, together with the itemization that we talked about early, gives me so much hope for this game. The baseline that this game has is so huge that even all the downsides we're going to talk about later, I want to make clear here, it has so much promise because the systems are there. They're just kind of clunky. The implementation can be lackluster at times, but everything they're doing is kind of gold. They have so many good, new, fresh ideas. But with that being said, let's go to the next point, which is the trading system in Last Epoch. And so this is a very interesting topic because usually when a game has trade, it will all revolve around trade. And the only way not to be a slave to the economy is play, for example, solo self-found, where you restrict yourself artificially. However, the way Last Epoch counters this is by giving you different item sets for either being solo self-found or trade. And what that lets them do is balance correctly. So for example, if you just can't trade, but you can only pick up what you found, and that is basically your character, you're gonna do worse than somebody on trade, and just being a worse version of a trade character isn't that much fun. However, with this faction system, that is not the case anymore. You can level up this faction system. So for example, right here, you can't really see it all that well, but if you go to the first level right here, enemies have a 35% chance to drop twice as many items. Rune of Ascendance, idle drop chance. Basically, this goes up to 10, and it increases your drop rates, basically reimbursing you for the fact that you're not going to trade in this faction. However, as you might think, this could be a problem because you could just be farming in this mode forever and then just go to trade and dump all your items. That is actually not possible with how it currently works because the trade system is actually completely decoupled from it. If you find an item on your self-found character, you cannot just trade that. That is a different item set. You can still play your character on the trade version, but then you have to acquire the items that way. And this is a huge upside for people who do not want to trade with other people. They want to have that RPG feeling of just picking up stuff from the ground, and that is it. And people who want to specialize in trade can also do so at the same time. I will say here at the end that this is a feature I haven't tested yet. We're before the main patch, which is going to release with it, but everything they've shown so far shows a huge understanding on their side of how different people like to play RPGs. So I do commend them for trying this fresh take, and I think it is going to be absolutely great. The implementation might not be perfect. Some things will have to be balanced, but in general, the idea is great. Then let's talk honorable mentions of stuff that I also really like, but didn't really have an overarching theme. First up, items can be target farmed. So what that means is in these endgame zones called monoliths, and there's different amounts of monoliths with different layouts, you can farm specific items that you're hunting after. So for example, down here in this monolith, it says exclusive echo reward. You can target farm unique or set melee weapons or bows or anything like that. You can do body armor, whatever your heart desires. So if you know those regions, or you can just click on it and see it, you can actually target farm for certain items. It's still not guaranteed, but you have a better chance than just hoping for it. I also really like the quick pickup for crafting materials. In case you guys don't know, these are all crafting materials. You can see right here, 47,000 of these, 3,000, 7,400. You don't have to click on all of these. Basically, when you click on one of these materials, on these shards, it will soak them all up like a vacuum. Now, next up, we have an inventory sort and search function. So here in the inventory, you can just press sort items and it is going to sort it, which is already big for a lot of ARPGs, as you might or might not know. And then in the stash tab, you can do the same thing down here over my cam, sort and configure tab. So it's going to sort the same way. You can also search all of your stashes to kind of know where it is. So for example, if I type in unique, it will only show the stash tabs where I have uniques in. You can also search for specific items. For example, if I want to find Cinder song, I type in Cinder and then I see only the stash tabs with exactly this item. We then have the build variety. There are often items in ARPGs that just give you, I don't know, like 10,000 damage to a certain skill. And it's like, oh, I guess I'm gonna use that skill now. Not in this game. Obviously, there are things that want to entice you to play certain skills, but they're not going to be as obvious. So for example, you're going to take your javelin and now instead of being a bleed or ignite, you're going to be lightning, and all of your bleed and ignite is going to get converted. So it lets you dive into a different build. However, it is not as straightforward. Has a lot of variety and a lot of exploration. And there are already more than 100 of these sorts of items that kind of push you in a certain direction without being too hand-holdy or obvious. And then right here we have 3 stash tabs for hoarders. I'm definitely one of those people. As you might see right here, I have a lot of stash tabs. This is my first column. It's my second column, and the way you buy these is with in-game gold. So you have to sacrifice something because you could be doing other things with that gold. But the first 10 or 20 stash tabs, in terms of how easy it is to farm the gold, are basically free. And after that, you kind of have to decide, do I do that dungeon and sacrifice that gold there? Or do I want more stash tabs? That's going to be up to you. But this game doesn't hold you by your hand. You mostly not have to ever sort your stash tab unless you want to. Now, next up for stuff I do not like in Last Epoch. First up, just because I have as many points in terms of downsides as I have in upsides does not mean that it's like I don't know, a 5 out of 10 or anything like that. Not even close. The things that I talked about in upsides are way more important to me than some of these downsides. For example, the way I usually play these games is with mini-map overlay, so I don't really see a lot of stuff once I'm in a map, and I listen to music on the side, so maybe some of the sound problems are not really a big issue for me, whereas everything else that goes into character making is a lot more important. However, not everybody's the same, so I want to point these out because some of them are pretty darn clunky. First up, the presentation and feel of the game. This game feels kind of janky. It is definitely not something you would call polished. It is not a AAA game. I guess I would call it a AA game, but just so you know, it is not, I don't know, fine-tuned in terms of visuals or sounds or effects. In fact, it's pretty rough around the edges, and you can clearly see what the devs prioritize. They prioritize systems. They are nerds. They care about that first, and everything else can at times feel quite shoehorned in. It feels like they took their systems and min-maxed them to the, I don't know, 100th degree, and then when it comes to everything else, they're just like, let's make it presentable enough so people might buy it. And that is especially noticeable with stuff like graphics, details, sound, music, and while these I do not really care too much about, they can still be an experience overall. So for example, if you take Path of Exile, the shatter sound with Herald of Ice, there's people who just make builds because it sounds nice and it looks nice. And yes, I know there is a graphics update in the works, but unless it overhauls everything, which I don't think it does, this is definitely a downside and will be for a lot of people, especially if you are used to stuff like Diablo, or even Path of Exile has way more stuff like details in its game, whatever you like, whatever you think about its graphics. The voice acting in this game ranges from terrible to okay, and sometimes good. They definitely did pick some of the ones that you hear more often. little bit better, but overall pretty damn janky in terms of quality. Same with skills, they can kind of feel plastic. And while some of these are fine, right, they're serviceable as sort of like loot acquisition methods, they don't really feel, I don't know, pristine or anything like that. The movement can also feel quite floaty at times. You don't really have too much impact in the game. It's very hard for me to describe this, but this is something that you will feel once you play the game. The second thing is the story and campaign. So you're kind of time traveling through certain eras, and you are visiting the same areas over and over, but they're different over time, and there's new areas that are opening up. Honestly, it feels completely convoluted, confusing. You just don't know what's going on. If you care about story at all, stay away from this game, in my personal opinion. I tried caring about it, and it is very hard to do. It just feels like shoehorned in. It feels like a placeholder. It feels like something they're like, okay, first we have those systems. We really want to make an RPG, but we have no vision for where this story is kind of going. You have like this time travel idea, I guess, but that's about it. You make up some names, you have some writers that do some decent work, and then we kind of try to make it fit. That's how it feels to me anyways. I don't want to be an asshole about this, but it does not feel like a coherent story. And the last one here is that I want to point out as well is this map is awfully confusing. Basically, you have these different eras that you have to path from, and it is beautiful, right? Like, if you look at this, whoever drew this, it is absolutely marvelous. I love it, right? The detail, everything. But if you want to maneuver on it, good luck. Now, thankfully, for quests, you can right-click it, which you know down here, quick travel, and it will show you where that quest in particular is. But in terms of having a coherent map of the world, you have no idea where you are at any point. You better hope there's a quest log to wherever you want to go, or you already have a few hundred hours in so you know exactly where to go. Otherwise, yeah, good luck. Now, oh boy, number 3. This is probably my biggest concern with this game, especially on launch. It's performance. Now, you have to be careful here because a lot of the people who will show you videos, me included, we're on offline right now. Because online, even before release, I'm in like mid-Europe, and I'm getting like 50 ms right now. So you won't have servers everywhere. That's the first thing. But on top of that, the loading times and everything are the bugs, right? The glitches. There's a lot out there. And we're 5 days from when I make this video, 5 days to release. Or I guess 6 days, 5 days, 6 days. I really hope this is not going to be the most catastrophic launch ever. Because having tried multiplayer online right now with basically nobody online, I can tell you it's a shit show. Because the problems that I just talked about with like graphic glitches, terrible loading times, they get 10 times worse. So what I will say here is I have no idea how it's going to be. So obviously, I don't want to be a doomsayer here. I really hope that I'm completely wrong on this. But I will say this. It released on a Wednesday. I would personally be careful taking off your Thursday and your Friday to make a long weekend, because you could get burnt. This release could be an absolute shit show because studios that are way bigger and way more experienced in these things are even failing to a certain degree. So I hope that's not going to be the case, but it is very likely. If you've played the game right now, you probably know what I mean. I will say this, the game does have an offline mode, which is also accessible offline on release, at least they said so, which is a big plus to me. So if you don't mind playing on offline, I will definitely count that as a big plus. Now, my prediction with performance is going to be there will be a lot of refunds. If you're somebody who's in it for the long haul anyways, you can try out Last Epoch whenever you want. You're going to be fine. But if you're targeting this hype first 2-3 days, it might get rough. Then some honorable mentions in the things I did not like. For example, the skill respecking in this game kind of sucks. Now, if you're experienced enough, you kind of know what to do here. So I'll show you this right now. For example, let's say I want to respec the skill right here. I don't want to specialize in the skill anymore. Because right here, it has a level 20 right now. So I can despecialize the skill, despecialize, and now it's gone. However, whatever skill I put in here, let's say I want to have hammer throw in here, I only have it on level 10 right now. Now, in very, very end game, you don't have to do that many maps to get it back to 20. However, especially mid-game, this can be incredibly frustrating, especially when you're leveling and your level 12 skill is all of a sudden level 5 or level 4. And especially with how they made the skills, it's kind of hard. If you can't reach the node that makes your skill function in the way you want it, that's a problem. You literally can't play the skill. So now you have to think about, oh, what do I do in the meantime while I level up that other skill? It's really jarring, and I don't think a lot of people who have like 1,000 hours in the game, they already know how to circumvent that. There are certain XP nodes in endgame, right? You just kind of save them for later. All good, but for new players, this is going to be a problem. Then we have endgame layouts, which can be quite monotonous. Some of them are filled with monsters, and you're going to see them every screen, and then others can be filled with almost no monsters. You have to run a lot. Skills without movement are going to feel a little bit sluggish, and it is the same layouts over and over again. As well as that, some of them are very long. You kind of have this arrow that I guess you can't see in the video in the back right here, but once a certain thing triggers, you're going to see an arrow, so you know exactly where to go. However, the arrow is not very accurate, so overall, pretty much a minus. Now, last thing here real quickly, which I get asked a lot as well, is my opinion on endgame. Because some people say the endgame is stale, the endgame is not really there yet, and it's kind of going to be a problem. After 5 days, you're done. I don't personally feel that at all. So first up, there is 3 different things you can do in the game. The first one is monoliths, which is sort of like your mapping system. You start here at the middle, and you can kind of go through these nodes. Each of these are zones that you have to conquer, and the web goes further and further and further, and it can get huge. The rewards are very specific, so you can path wherever you want. You can reset the rewards. You can change the rewards. You can completely reset the map, whatever you want. At the outskirts, there are certain things you can do. There's a boss fight. You have these dungeon keys that you can farm for. Currently, there's 3 different dungeons, and they have very unique and awesome rewards at the end. Obviously, they're basically like a big boss fight or kind of like a mini raid. Depending on which dungeon, there are certain things that you have to interact with, so it's not just like blindly killing mobs. You actually have to think about what you're doing, which I think is a very cool touch. And at the end, you have Arena, which is infinite waves of enemies that come at you. You can basically limit test your character. As for my opinion, most people will be in monoliths almost all the time. Can they get monotonous and grindy? Yes. But is that a thing in ARPGs? Yes. The fact is, whether you want to grind or not just depends on your goals. Usually for me, the point where I stop having goals is the point where I just don't want to go on anymore, and it feels like, oh, it's not fun endgame. However, most of the people who will tell you there's no endgame in Last Epoch already have thousands of hours in the game. As somebody who only has 1,000 before the release, I can tell you it's fine. I can come back. It's okay. But if I try to squeeze thousands and thousands of hours of content out of an early access game, that is just absolutely crazy. That is not something you're gonna get. So for any new player, there is gonna be an adequate amount of things to farm for. And guess what? More than 99% of players will pick up this game and have never played it before. And they have so many things to figure out. So little content, in my opinion, is definitely not true. And even once you have finished your character, which by the way will never happen, but let's say you're at a point where you're happy with it, you can still measure it in Arena versus other people. There is going to be a leaderboard on release, wink wink, where you can see how you're doing against other builds. So do I think it's the most amazing endgame ever? No. But I also have 1,000 hours in it. I remember a time where I was actually pretty stoked. I like going through the monoliths. I liked how they farmed. You can target farm items. So in general, I think most people are going to be happy with it. With that comes my conclusion, in case you didn't want to go through every single point right here. This game has a great foundation to be one of the best ARPGs on the market. It will take some time, but if it gets fleshed out, the systems are there, the foundation is there, everything can be built upon. The devs interact with the community a lot. They're very smart about what they're doing and what they're changing. They have already made a great game as is. Tons of things that they wanted to solve in the game. They have put in very fresh ideas that can solve those issues that, for example, other ARPGs have. But the game is rough around the edges when it comes to visual and presentation and skills and whatnot. The foundation of the itemization, the skills, etc., are so well fleshed out. They put in so much time there, and everything else just kind of came second and after, which for me personally is still better than the other way around. Wink wink, Diablo 4. Visuals and sound are also below average, I would personally say, quite a bit. And the performance issues are a big deal. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm not doomsaying when I say this release could get really rocky, one of the rockiest we've ever seen, kind of Wolfson-like. I hope it's not going to get to that. So is it worth it? I would say it's a highly recommend for me if you're an ARPG veteran. If you're somebody who has a lot of years in Path of Exile or Diablo, I think most of what you care for might be skills and just having that item hunt, having that dopamine kick, and that is very well done in Last Epoch. It is one of the best ones at that. In fact, it could even overtake maybe Path of Exile one day. So in that case, I would say that, but then you probably already know that and you don't have to watch this video. And I would say the game is okay to good for everybody else. If you're not sure about it, if $35 is a lot for you, I would probably just wait. But even if you're somebody who just wants to casually play the game for like a few days, every league or every so often, Since there is an offline mode, I think it is very comfortable to play. As long as you're not looking for immersion or like next-gen graphics or anything like that, I think you're still going to very much enjoy this game. Now, if I had to rate the game right now, for me, I would probably give it around about a 6.5 to 7 out of 10 right now. I think it is one of the most promising games out there, but I don't know about this release timeline. I'm still a little bit skeptical, having played and followed this game for so long. However, I will be blasting this game for at least 2 to 3 weeks. I already know what to expect. It's going to be awesome. But in general, I hope this was an informative video. Well, maybe a little bit too long for you, but either way, I hope you have a lot of fun on release if you choose to get the game. And yeah, if you played the game, if I forgot something that you think everybody should know down in the comments, definitely put it down. I'm going to highlight it if it's important to the discussion. But in general, hope you enjoyed the video. And since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.